few years ago, I was on my usual jeepney ride to school on the usual time with the usual bunch of people. You know, college students, employees. All the while, the skyline outside looked really different, with dark skies and billboards down, and the wind was blowing as expected. So much so that the delivery motorcycles of Jollibee toppled over just as we were passing by. That was the first time I have ever experienced being in Davao City and being included in the list of cities warned for the coming of a storm. And apparently, the thing I do when the jeepney is dark and I'm feeling cold and bored is stare at the bright screen of my seatmate's cell phone, who, despite looking quite pissed for being there, was actually quite happy in social media. Because despite the fact that he can't join in on the hashtag walang pasok trend, at least he can now relate to the everyday problems immortalized by memes. And yeah, now, maybe, so can I. For people like us who are lucky enough, our storm stories revolve on matters like, sana makancel ang klase, ang baha, or I need an OOTD for hashtag sweater weather. Trivial and normal. But for those living in the other parts of the country, normalcy was being ripped from them while we were having our good night's sleep. When we were younger, we were taught the threesome called basic needs: food, water, and shelter, together. But which one do you personally think is the most important of the three? Huh? Okay, let's check. This is the rule of threes. An average person can live up to 3 minutes without air. In harsh environments, say it's snowing and you have a higher chance of getting hypothermia, you have about 3 hours to survive without shelter. After three days, you'll need water or you'll perish. And if you answered food, at the very bottom, you can survive up to 3 weeks without food. Based on this, much urgency should have been placed on the provision of proper shelter. But these photos show a different reality for us Filipinos. These photos were taken on November of 2013, but they might as well have been taken several times annually. Locally, around 19 tropical storms enter the Philippine area of responsibility, while an average of 6 to 9 make landfall. This alone sounds scary enough, right? But I'm sad to say that there are more types of disasters aside from the natural varieties. So I guess the question now is, what can we do to help? Of course, we can just point fingers again, but then that won't lead us nowhere. Personally, I don't think it's a case of the government not doing anything. But maybe there is a problem with what is being considered a priority. Why? Usually, and for a very good reason, a few days after the disaster, most of the attention is directed towards the provision of food, water, and clothing for the victims. And, as the story of many survivors suggests, the shelter problem will remain to be one of those seemingly delayed, if not forgotten, priorities. This is Maslow's hierarchy of needs. And as you can see, 4 of the evacuees' needs have already been dealt with. But what about sleep and excretion? And don't even get me started on the sex. Of course, we can all just say abstinence is key, right? But then that won't be realistic. A lot of the remaining needs are anchored on shelter. But according to reports on Lambda, for example, more than 400,000 evacuees were divided among just 1,500 evacuation centers. Evacuation centers were the spaces, the provision of toilets, for example, were not exactly designed to accommodate hundreds of people staying 24/7. And that's why we end up with this. When we hear about disasters, our usual and go-to solution is to provide relief goods, right? But it should not stop with that. I propose that relief operations should start with that instead. You're probably thinking, what do I mean? So first, let's talk relief goods. Do we know where they come from? Yes, definitely. Do we know what they are? I'm pretty sure we all have an idea. But do we know what happens to them after their contents are consumed? If we receive an X amount of relief goods, I think it's safe to assume that most of the packaging materials used for them will eventually be trash, right? So do we just add packaging material waste to their many problems? Or just go for the out of sight, out of mind yet again, just throw them with all the debris? I sure hope not. So let's simplify things. On one hand, we have a lack of emergency shelter. And on the other, we have the garbage plus debris problem. How do we plan to solve this? Of course, number one, we need shelter. Or better ones for that matter. And for that, we need workers. Evacuation centers house hundreds of people. And as we Filipinos pride ourselves, walang iwanan sa bayan ni Juan. And yet, we fail to utilize this strength in numbers, this unity in adversity. If you've watched the news lately, several evacuees from Marawi have already started planting in preparation for when the help stops, because it eventually does stop. So any help to guide them back to normalcy will surely be appreciated. Let us empower communities to empower themselves. Next, materials. Usual construction materials are quite burdensome to transport, especially if your number one priority is to deliver relief goods and not concrete. But luckily for us, most of the materials for my proposal are already there. Debris, which you probably know from signs like these. But there's actually more to it than that. Debris is defined as a lot of things. So, do we have remains of something broken down or destroyed? How about an accumulation of fragments of rock? Something discarded? Paper, plastic, metal, soil, concrete, name it, it's there. So what are the advantages of using these materials? Number one, ease of transport. Usual construction materials are heavy, but our packaging materials are not, because you wouldn't buy a liter of water inside a 5-kilogram bottle, right? It's impractical. So weight is a problem that's already been dealt with by the manufacturing plants for us. Two, they're already there. So no need for much transport, really. Next, skills. Does an average Joe know how to build a house? Maybe no, but if we simplify the process enough that volunteers versed in construction can supervise them, then why not try? Besides, it's not like this is the first time you've heard this. Countless volunteer programs prove that this can work. Lastly, how? How these materials are fashioned to come up with a usable form. And I guess that's where I come in. And considering the limited time I've been given, I'm going to talk to you about just a few of my favorites. So let's start with paper, specifically paper tubes. And for those of you wondering if it's just a longer version of your usual toilet paper rolls, then no. It is longer, yes, but it's actually thicker, and it comes in an assortment of lengths and diameters, as you can see. But instead of the usual tissue or toilet paper, these are used for laminated sack, or trapal. One of the things you surely won't miss in an evacuation site. So the question now is, how do we use them? We simply cut circular holes by means of a hole saw, insert a smaller diameter tube when connecting two pieces together, duct tape, add cloth, and you have a divider. In some cases, pieces of paperboard or carton are taped together to provide at least a small amount of protection against the cold concrete floors of evacuation centers. I know this may sound and look like a simple DIY project for some of you, but for those people living in these evacuation centers where you don't know where your area ends and your neighbors begin, then this is a simple and generous solution for those who would otherwise be without any privacy or comfort. Now let me ask you, if you were one of these evacuees, would you rather stay here or here? Next up, what if you had at least a small amount of cement to use? How will you maximize this using the present materials available? You can actually use a lot of materials for this. So let's start with plastic. Plastic bottle bricks. You can fill it with sand or any fine material available on site, compact it with wood or metal, and you have your bricks. Next, you just lay them onto a mortar bed. Use a string or a wire to tie the middle of the bottles together and the necks. This serves as the reinforcement. Plaster, and you're done. It's not even that obvious on the outside if you plaster properly. Next, tin cans. Compared to plastic bottle bricks, these are actually less sturdy because, as you know, they are hollow in the middle. So in order to compensate for this, we create a sort of honeycomb pattern with a mortar bed in order to avoid contact between the cans and thus ensure proper distribution of loads. Once again, plaster, done. Lastly, instead of using glass windows to provide protection from the elements while still admitting light, why not use glass bottles? As you can see here. Or you can make your own glass bottle bricks, like here. Yes, and for those of you wondering, that's me DIYing the heck out of that bottle. For this one, we use the innate weakness of glass to sudden changes in extreme temperature. So first, we expose it to heat, focus on that burning piece of string, dip it into ice water, wait for that crackling sound, and you have your half a bottle brick. Duct tape two together, and you have your glass bottle brick. Once again, using the same honeycomb pattern as explained earlier, and you have a glass bottle wall. A simple and DIY version of your usual glass block walls. Easy peasy. Lastly, wood in the form of wooden pallets. You may wonder, wooden pallets, packaging materials. These are actually classified as tertiary packaging, and in my opinion, the easiest to work with. Why? Because of familiarity. Almost every one of us here knows how wood construction works. Use a saw, hammer, add a nail, or screw them together. You can use whole wooden pallets or disassemble them into planks to come up with structures like this or this, and if you're feeling fancy, this. Now for the bonus round. I'm going to show you a temporary shelter prototype using several packaging materials. Okay, after a few minutes of talking about materials on and on, I'm hoping some of you are already familiar with the materials available. Okay, but if you don't, I got you. Using the same principle used and the same methodology used for our paper tube dividers, but using thatch and sawali instead of cloth, we have created an actual temporary shelter. So what did we do differently in these examples? By simplifying the process, the overall design, we have ensured shorter fabrication periods. By engaging communities, we have not only generated environmental and community benefits, we have also ensured the transfer of knowledge regarding these the use of these non-conventional construction materials for things that we need, like emergency shelters. And who knows, maybe after some time, we can develop more prototypes that we can assemble and disassemble on site when needed. So perhaps the next time this great need for shelter arrives, instead of doing tasks individually like this, why not do it like this? So while providing relief goods, we are also ensuring that we have available construction materials. All that's left to do is ensure proper waste disposal and segregation. Next, we educate the evacuees through trainings. We teach them how they can build their own shelter. And through this, we can crush out more of their needs sooner rather than later. Because when do the evacuees need shelter? Now let me ask you, when do you need your basic needs? Surely not in a year or in a month. They need basic needs the same way we do, and that is now. Thank you.